Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well out there. This lecture is going to cover critical response, which is a very important concept for us because it is going to support the writing that we're going to do, the argumentation that we're going to do, and the research skills that we're going to develop over the course of the semester. So I just want to talk about the concept of critical response and let you know how I'm defining that term and the features of critical response in this short video. So feel free to watch this video, pause the video and continue it at your own pace, but it is designed to support your work this semester and especially to use for the upcoming critical response essay that we're going to do. So I'm going to share screen and show a PowerPoint. This PowerPoint is also going to be posted for you on D2L so that you can access these slides later if you want to do that. So let me share screen and I will go ahead and get started here. Okay, so you should be seeing a screen that says critical response on here. So critical response is something that we're starting with because it is using 1302 as a chance to develop your thinking and your ability to make solid arguments on an even higher level than you've done in the past. So what we're going to be doing with our upcoming paper is that you're going to be selecting a text to respond to. This text is going to be able to be an article, maybe an online article that you find, a chapter in a book that you've read, or a TED Talk that you've seen that can also constitute a text. So what you're going to do is select something that you're interested in that is making some kind of argument. Needs to be somebody making an argument of some kind. And the work of this upcoming paper is that you're going to critically respond to this person's argument, to the text that you choose and select to read or watch if it's a video. Okay, so I will have more details about that and the piece that you're going to select and guidance for you, even some options for you to just choose one of those options if you want, or go out on your own and choose a different one. So you're going to see all of that posted in D2L, but this video in particular is just going to be a lecture on critical response, what it means, and how to do that a little bit more in depth with your writing. Okay, so critical response has to do with using critical thinking in order to analyze an argument and contribute to the study of a topic. So it's different than just responding personally to something. And responding personally is completely valid and it's very useful in a lot of contexts. But we're going to combine our personal experience with other intellectual activities to create a critical response. This means that we're going to try to suspend our personal emotions and experiences at the beginning in order to bring in other questions to our mind, other comparisons we might be able to make, and kind of investigate and think through an idea and then formulate our critical response based on that. So a critical response is just a more involved process. It's a more, it uses critical thinking in a lot of different ways in order to create your response to someone's argument, rather than just having a gut reaction to somebody's argument or only basing your response on your personal experience, which is more of a personal reaction than a critical response. So the difference between a personal reaction and a critical response has to do with the way that you are combining different features and elements into your response that all involve critical thinking. So in terms of critical thinking, I'm talking about objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. So that word objective is really important to consider. If you are choosing a piece to respond to, someone is making an argument about an issue or a topic that matters to you, then it is going to be harder to try to be objective for a little bit. But in order to think critically, we have to at least make an attempt at objectivity at the start, and then we can bring in our emotional reaction or our personal experience later on in the process of doing that, and combine that into our critical response. But critical thinking means that we need to try to evaluate and analyze someone's argument based on the strengths of their reasons, the types of support that they use, the comparisons and connections that they make and that we make, and more of the features that you're about to see in this lecture. So critical thinking, just in and of itself, and I know that we've been thinking about critical thinking, it is one of the top skills desired by employers out there in almost all fields, and that's because it can really save companies from issues that they may have if they have a lot of employees who are not thinking critically. You can become problem solvers. You can anticipate things that could possibly happen. You can initiate and innovate for that company as part of your job description there, and that's why they are some of the reasons that they really like to have employees that can think critically. Also, it just helps you on an individual level to make better decisions if you're able to think critically about your decisions before you make your choice. So it's a good, just on a personal level, it's a good thing to be able to think critically when you are going through your decision making there. And also it helps you contribute to the world around you. Of course, as everybody realizes, I'm sure we've got a lot of issues of our day that we may wish to contribute to, right? We may wish to build a better world in some way, or try to help with some issues that we see in our local communities or in our world at large. So being able to think critically means that you're able to contribute, in some different ways, because you're going to be helping to see what measures might really actually be impactful towards helping to solve these issues. This is something that we're going to see come to fruition a little bit in our final project later in the semester, which you'll get to hear about later on. But critical thinking is very valuable. And it is something that there are large scale ramifications if we have communities where people are not thinking critically about things. There is an impact from that. So it is a top skill, and it's really desired for career settings personally, and just on a community societal level too. So for our upcoming project, I really recommend that you think about having a conversation between yourself and the author of that article that you choose, or the speaker of the TED Talk. So they're not actually there having a conversation with you, but if you can think about your reaction and build more of your own response to the specific things that they're saying, this is going to gear your notes towards having a more detailed critical response to offer in your paper. So pretend as though you're having a conversation with that author or the speaker of that TED Talk. What would you say to them if you were responding directly to some things that they have said in that speech or in that article? What would your side of the conversation be? What kinds of questions would you ask this person? What kinds of reactions would you have to the comments that they are making, to the reasoning that they give? What kinds of examples would come to your mind? Would it make you connect to anything in your own experience or the experience of people around you? But what would you say? What would you be bringing to the table? How would you react and respond specifically and directly to the things that they are saying? Just like in a great conversation, you're not just speaking and then just waiting for the other person, just waiting for their turn to speak. You're actually reacting and responding to things that you're saying back and forth along the way. So if you're thinking about a great active conversation where you're listening to what that speaker is saying or the author of the article, and you are folding in your reaction, your comments, and the ways that you want to further the conversation, what would you bring to the table in that? So we want there to be, in a critical response, a lot of connection between you and the original author or speaker, connecting back and forth with what they have presented in their argument. So this, and by the way, this is something that is just, also part of active reading skills too. And it's something that you can develop habitually if you don't already do this. There are some tricks to help develop this if you want to do that, by making, your own version of shorthand for your reactions that you can put either on the screen or in your notes if you're writing on the document itself, or you're writing notes on a video. But having your own shorthand for the ways that you're reacting to things, like maybe a light bulb for a bright idea that's really insightful that you think you would have something to say about. Maybe write down some examples of connections that things remind you of, current events, or things you've studied in the past that you might be able to bring up, but your own form of reacting. And the more that you're doing that, the more you're going to start doing that just naturally as you see or are presented with somebody's argument or ideas. So part of critical response involves asking questions. We're talking about intellectual curiosity with critical response. And even though it has the word critical in the title, critical response does not need to be negative. It just means that we're using critical thinking. So we might use critical thinking and realize that we really support this idea, right? We are thinking through all the ways that this would really benefit society or the community. And we are realizing more and more through the process how much we need to promote this idea from this person. We might also see the opposite, right? Or some combination. So we might see, wow, there are a lot of problems with this idea. This idea might be dangerous. This idea could harm people. This idea would fail. It's just not practical. So we are going to ask questions and then investigate in a somewhat neutral way, best as we can in the beginning, to then come to our response in the end, whether we want to support someone's idea, to challenge their idea, or some combination of the two. So just because it has the word critical in there does not mean that it needs to be negative. And you won't need to write a paper just tearing down and challenging that speaker or that author of the article, unless that's what happens when you're critically responding and you want to challenge them in your response. Okay, so asking questions is a big part of that investigation. You would be thinking in your mind about this, since you're not actually in front of that person, the author or the speaker. You would be thinking, okay, what are the implications of this person's statement? What are they implying that they're not directly saying? Like, are they implying that they are prioritizing things in a certain way in making this particular argument? What do I think about that implication? So if you see any implications, these are things that are not directly stated, they're implied, they go along with the ideas that are presented. And so it's a good thing to kind of ask what's being implied here that's not directly stated. What are the consequences of this idea? And by the way, even though the word consequences has a negative connotation to it, you might come to a decision that this will have a really great benefits. And that would be a consequence of rolling forward with this person's argument. Like if someone is arguing that we should build a community park in the Conroe area needs a better park, maybe, is the argument. And we're thinking, okay, what are the consequences of this idea? Well, could actually have a lot of benefit for local children in the area to have a safe place to go for physical activity or whatever, and be around nature. So of course I'm just making that up. I haven't investigated that idea, but I'd be thinking, what are the consequences of this idea? And would the idea be practical? So if someone has a great idea and it sounds really exciting, that's wonderful, but it doesn't really work out if it can't practically happen in reality. So we have to ask questions of practicality too. How would we have the money for this? How are we going to have the space for this idea to happen if it's something physical that's going to happen? How are we going to deal with opposition to this particular idea? Is there an educational component to this idea or a training component to this idea? How would that work out? Who needs to be involved in making this idea really happen? So if we're thinking about practicality, that leads to a whole set of other issues that you might discover. And again, you might discover that it is completely practically possible to do this idea. Or maybe you're going to discover the opposite, or maybe you're going to say, you know, so far we don't have things set up to make this practically work, but it is possible if we make some changes, it could potentially happen. So asking questions is a big part of this. Questions are great. Questions are active, are activities of the mind, and they can lead you to unearth some things in this article or in this speaker's argument that you maybe didn't think of before. Questions are really important in critical thinking. Okay, so also, we're going to try to go to some deeper levels when we do critical response by thinking about how this person's argument or how this person's idea would impact other things outside of ourselves. So various groups of people, for example, not just groups that we identify with, but how would an idea impact various other groups of people, communities, other communities that are out there, maybe generations that we aren't part of, generational groups. How would it impact the economy? That's another really, and of course, these questions are questions that you're going to want to do some research to help you answer. And this is a big list here. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a long list. And you are going to select ones that are most important to you in your critical response. You won't need to write about all of these in one particular assignment. So certain topics that you choose would really lend themselves to particular items on this list. Like, for example, if someone is making an argument and the argument has something to do with an environmental change, obviously we want to think about the environment on this list, right? And we're going to be thinking about, probably going to think about maybe even health and safety with a topic like that. So see which of these may apply to the idea that you choose, and use these as a way to expand what you want to say. So a lot of times writers tell me that they are having difficulty creating more, finding more things to talk about. Okay, so we are great at oftentimes coming up with quick ideas, or sometimes people are great at that, but have a little bit more of a challenge in developing these ideas and going into depth. So we want to go into depth in this critical response. And on this slide is, a suggestion for how to do that. You deepen your reaction and your critical response by thinking through some of these different layers. So maybe this would be great, maybe this proposal idea would be great for teenagers, but it would really take away resources or something like that from the elderly community. That's just an example. So this is going to deepen your analysis and give you more to talk about and more to research with this particular person's argument, whatever that argument happens to be about. And again, not an exhaustive list, but we want to deepen it by thinking about other layers. That's part of critical thinking too, thinking outside of ourselves. And maybe an idea might sound great for us or for our personal experience, but if we really think about it critically, it could actually be harmful to someone else. So maybe we wouldn't want to support it ultimately. All right. So when we're doing that in writing, there are some statements or templates out there. These on the screen come from a book called They Say, I Say. And even though we don't use, or we're not using this particular book, we don't have a textbook, I do recommend if you would like to purchase a book and you're just interested in purchasing one, this happens to be a really nice textbook. It's called They Say, I Say. It's from Norton. So let me know if you want any more information about that. But these templates come from that particular book. So if we're writing and we want to offer a critical response and we would like to respond to this author or speaker, we can say stuff like, you say this, but what about this? You imply this, but this. Are you saying that this? And if so, this. Why don't you mention this? Didn't you consider this? If what you say is true, what about this? So as you can see, these are geared as more of challenges to the speaker. Sometimes what is left out is just as important as what a speaker will or an author will put in to an argument, right? So if they leave out an entire major element in this issue or topic, that's something that you might want to challenge. You might want to point that out. Why don't you mention this over here? This is a really important part of the situation. Okay, so those are just some ideas. Again, even though these are more for challenging, they are ways that you can directly have more of that academic conversation with this individual. There are other ways to be offering your support by saying things like, you know, your idea that blank is valid because blank, right? Or your proposal that we should blank will benefit the this particular group by offering blank. So you can be supportive as well in your critical response. So one thing that I'm thinking you may have heard about before that comes into play when we are thinking critically is that we want to evaluate whether the speaker or author is using logical fallacies to support the argument. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning. It means that whatever is being said in that logical fallacy is not logical. So we do not want to support anyone's statement based on a logical fallacy, because logical fallacies are misrepresentations of reality. They are sometimes exaggerations of reality, and they're more almost like tricks that can be used to manipulate the audience into agreeing with the argument, but they're not real. They don't represent logical reality. So that being said, they are very persuasive. And if you're not recognizing them when they happen, you can find yourself very tempted to go with this person's argument based on a logical fallacy, because they all connect to different parts of our human nature and why we would be more likely to agree or see these as potentially convincing. I should say too that speakers and authors sometimes use logical fallacies without intentionally using them to manipulate. Like they may not be thinking about that as an intention when they use them, or maybe they are in certain circumstances. So these are just a few of the logical fallacies on this slide. There are tons of these logical fallacies out there. There's a lot of great information about logical fallacies. I am also thinking of linking a little bit more of some resources for you about logical fallacies too. But hasty generalization happens as a logical fallacy when we make a blanket, huge general statement about something based on very little experience or evidence. So that's illogical because I don't have enough experience or evidence to make a blanket huge statement about something. For example, if I was to go on a terrible blind date, I cannot say after that, okay, blind dates are awful and no one should go on a blind date. I've made a hasty generalization because I only went on one blind date. I don't have enough evidence or experience to really make a statement that's a general statement like that. Faulty cause and effect happens when we make a statement that one thing caused another when it didn't really cause the other thing. So part of what can happen in this is just assuming that because something happens after something else, that the first thing caused the second thing to happen, but that's not always necessarily the case. Like, for example, if I am, there's a famous example that is, you know, sort of a superstition example. But if I was to wash my car and then it rains right afterward, I can say, oh, I rained. So, I washed my car. So of course it's going to rain right after that. It's faulty cause and effect because one thing didn't really have anything to do with the other. It's just that one happened after the other. So faulty cause and effect. Ad hominem is attack on the man or attack on the person, and this is attacking someone's character instead of addressing their argument or their reasoning. So it's when we say that we can't agree with someone's argument because of their character. So it's possible for someone to have flaws in their character but still be making an argument that has solid reasoning. You know, one thing doesn't necessarily have to do with the other. So ad hominem is a logical fallacy, right? So if someone had an idea about, for example, what we should do about traffic on 242, and let's just say that this person happens to be an engineer and has an idea about how we can address traffic issues on 242. But someone says, you know what, we can't go with this person's idea because this person has a gambling problem. Okay, well, whether or not they have a gambling problem doesn't necessarily mean that they are incorrect about the traffic situation on 242. So it's not logical to say that we can't go with that person's argument because of their something in their character or something about them personally. So that's an ad hominem. Red herring is a distraction tactic. A red herring is when someone is trying to distract the audience, in this case, the reader or the audience of the TED Talk, by throwing out something that is going to get our attention and trying to avoid the major point. If someone is in an interview and they're asked a question that they don't want to answer for whatever reason, maybe they are running for office, or maybe they're afraid of ramifications of their answer, they might say something like, "Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. But I really think we should focus on this right now. I really think we should talk about this." They're going to try to throw out a red herring. It's a distraction tactic. Bandwagon is, get on the bandwagon, kind of the popularity or a sense of belonging one here. All of the cool people are doing this, so you need to get on the bandwagon and do this too, which of course is not logical, that you would have to make a decision based on popularity of that choice, perceived popularity of that choice even. Slippery slope has to do with when there's a suggestion that if you take one particular step, is going to lead you down a slippery slope to these horrific consequences way into the future. This is not logical because there are, in reality, many, many steps along the way where things can change and be altered, or a change of course can happen. So that's just like in a classroom setting, for example, if someone said, "Oh, if you allow students to not take this particular quiz, pretty soon they're not going to show up for class and they're not going to do any of their assignments because you allowed them to not take this quiz." Well, that's not really logical, right? Just having that one instance where the class didn't have to take a quiz doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get to all of those consequences way into the future. So that's not logical. Anyway, that is just a little bit of a talk on logical fallacies, but they are widespread. They're used all the time. Anytime that someone is trying to convince you of something else, they can be used to convince you to buy a product, by a company. They can be used to convince you to vote for a political candidate. They can be used in an interpersonal way to convince you to do something. Logical fallacies are everywhere, and so once you start to see them, if you haven't already started to or learned about these in the past, really recommend building your awareness of logical fallacies and starting to recognize them, because again, they are errors in reasoning. They are not logical, so you don't want to use them as the only reason that you would want to agree with somebody else. Okay, so back to another feature of critical response here. Critical response can involve testing out an idea based on precedent and experience. Okay, so other than things that we've talked about before, thinking about the practicality of an idea, the consequences, how it would impact various groups of people, all that we've discussed, the logical fallacies, you can also think about whether this idea has ever been proposed in the past or something that is similar. Does this remind you of some argument that someone has made in the past? Like, for example, back to my park in Conroe idea, I would be thinking, has anyone ever tried to build a park over there in that part of Conroe before? Have they proposed that before? And how did it play out if they did? What happened? Did they try to get things rolling, but then they encountered some obstacles? What were those? Are things going to be different today? Have things changed enough today for it to be different? How did it play out in history? So think critically about the comparisons that you're making, though, because we always have to recognize that today is a different time in history, and it's not ever going to be completely identical to any time in the past. We need to also think globally about what we're saying too when we make comparisons. If we say, okay, well, such and such country has their system set up this way, and this country has the system set up this way, we need to acknowledge that the two countries have different features and are not the same. So even as we make comparisons, which is useful to do, we just always have to remain aware that our time period is unique and our particular setting is unique. Every setting is its own unique setting. So yeah, things are not going to be completely identical. Okay, so also testing it against experience, testing the idea against experience. How does this idea compare with your experience or the experiences of those around you, family and friends, or people that you have seen, maybe people that you have famously seen through current events, for example. If someone is proposing an idea, how does that square with your experience or the experience of those around you? Keep in mind, and I know I just brought up personal experience there. Keep in mind that for critical response, personal experience is not enough to discount someone's idea. You're also going to need to provide other forms of support for your idea based on the other things that we had talked about. Not only is your personal experience in there, but how would this idea impact other people outside of yourself? How does this impact or square with history, for example, or other current events, other things that you've studied? How does it work out in the ways that we've talked about so far in the lecture? So your personal experience is completely valid. It's just not going to be enough to build a critical response that would reach a wider audience and would involve more of that, those features that we've been talking about there. Okay, so finally, critical response is going to go beyond personal opinion. Just like I just mentioned there, you need to justify your opinion with reasons and with research to back up your position there in your critical response. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing screen here. I hope that was helpful in terms of what it means to critically respond. Critical response is using critical thinking to respond to someone, to a proposal or an argument that you see, an idea that someone has. You're thinking through the idea, you're thinking through that person's argument, and then you're going to decide whether you would ultimately support it, you want to challenge it, or some combination of the two. I hope you enjoy working on the critical response paper. I'm thinking that a lot of us may not have done a paper like this one in the past. So please look through all of the materials that you'll see there in D2L, and you will be hearing from me again soon. I hope you're all doing well.